Forgive me if my dog starts barking here because when she hears the other dog, she'll chime in. Steve, it is now, shall we go ahead and open this meeting?
Yeah, I'm ready if everybody's here, right? It looks like.
Everybody's there.
Okay, this is Carol, and I wasn't sure if Rob Thal, our attorney, was on, or if I told him that it would be okay if he came in a little bit late due to the fact that we had some other business to take care of, minutes and a few other things as well.
Rob's here.
Hi, Carol.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay.
Excellent. All right. Well, I will call the meeting to order. I'm showing 8:03 p.m.
Okay.
I guess we can skip by the pledge till we meet in person again. Have a roll call of members. Make sure your audio is working. Tom,
Yes.
Dawn,
Yes.
Leah,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes, sir.
Andy,
Yes.
and Dave is absent with notice, so we should be good to go. Need somebody to suggest approval of tonight's agenda, which has been slimmed down quite a bit. Is basically, there's going to be a work session on discussion.
So move.
I will so move.
Need a
Tom?
second.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor on a roll call vote. Tom,
Yes.
Dawn,
Yes.
Leah,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Sandy,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. I assume everybody's had a chance to look over the minutes from last meeting. It was a pretty long meeting, a lot of detail, but I think we have it all right. Any discussion or changes on that?
This is Carol. The only thing I have to say is I just noticed on the agenda, I apologize. I have March 25th, 2020 instead of 2021.
Oh, on the, yeah, okay. Yep, I see
I will
that. You're
fix
right.
that.
Okay,
Steve,
yes, Dawn.
I just want to extend my appreciation and thanks to Mike Van Buren and to Carol Knixke for the really fine job that they did in my absence. I don't think I could have done this well with this meeting. So thank you both very much.
You're
Yep,
welcome.
thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Okay, can I get a approval of the minutes?
I'll make a motion. We approve the minutes.
I'll second it.
Okay, we got Leah and Mike seconding. Roll call, all in favor. Tom,
Yes.
Dawn,
Yes.
Leah,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Sandy.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Okay. I guess we'll open the public comment section. If any of the public here has comments on anything that is not on tonight's agenda, now would be the time to bring it up. Please keep them short to 3 minutes or less.
This is Carol. Can I start first?
You sure can.
I would like to thank the Planning Commission for all the work they did on the Chelsea Springs project. The Township Board approved the development agreement last night. And all the documentation, all the work you put into it, it went very smoothly. So thank you very much. You did a terrific job. And I'm very happy that you put all that effort into it. Thank you.
Great, that's good to hear. Good progress.
Mary is next.
Thanks, Rod. I just wanted to ask a quick question about the item that has been tabled. And I know tabled isn't the right word, postponed maybe, the zoning industrial on Pierce Road. That's been, what's the right word?
It was,
Postponed?
Postponed. So where did that postponement come from? Is that from the planning commission, or is that a citizen or a lawyer? Who requested the postponement, please?
The applicant.
I'm sorry?
On both projects. And if I can address that, Steve, may I address both of those postponements?
yes, please.
Okay, so the postponement for the preliminary site plan for Chelsea Square was based on the fact that the information that was requested at the last meeting was not yet ready. So he decided to wait until the May meeting. And the postponement request for the rezoning was also from the applicant because they were still trying to figure out exactly where they wanted to go with this. So
And
both applicants requested postponements.
Or what does that mean, where they wanted to go with it? What does that mean, please?
I don't know. They're just, that's exactly, they're not sure what direction they want to take.
The proposed people who want to put in some industrial, I don't know. Are we talking about Mr. Kearns? Is that it?
Yes, the applicant that requested the zoning change asked to postpone, I understand.
Based, because he's just gonna kind of double check and see what he wants to do next.
Right, he wanted to look
Correct.
further, into what their plans were.
So is that property still on the market? Last I checked, it was under contract still. Is he still the buyer of that property?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know
we
either.
don't, that we don't know. But we just go on the fact that he asked to postpone this until he knew what direction he wanted to take.
Okay, I just worry because a lot of things can happen before the next meeting, and I just want to make sure that we're prepared and we know what he's up to. Those of us on Pierce Road, I mean. Okay, I'm done. That's just, I'm fine. Thank you. Thanks for clarification.
Thank you.
And in case you don't hear me tonight, when I thank you at the end, thanks for all the work you guys do. It is appreciated.
Any other comments? Okay, I guess we will close the public comment section then, there being no more. And under the unfinished business, we've postponed the Chelsea Square request, postponed the Pierce Road property by request. So I think we need to move on to the new business, which is the main course of the meeting tonight. I know a lot of the members have questions to the judgment properties and sewer taps and other details. So we'll move on into that. I know, Dawn, you had quite a few questions. Carol, anything you want to say before we just start shooting some questions for the attorney or Sue?
Nope, I think that this is really kind of open for the planning commission because this is new territory for everybody. And I think we're all looking to find out what direction and limitations the planning commission has.
Yes.
You might as well tell Mandy that
Where is she?
upstairs, I don't know.
I thought she was in here.
Well, you might as well, she may have, it says you might as well tell her they're not gonna do nothing.
Okay.
We hope.
Dawn, did you want to start? I know you had a number of questions.
Yes, yes, please. Thank you. I hope we do get some things done this evening. As I've thought about this whole process, especially with the consent judgments, it just feels like it was a good idea for us to take this time when we don't have other actions before us, to spend a little time trying to understand what we need to know and what we will maybe asked to consider moving forward. So this is a good open discussion for about all of the properties under consent judgment. I thank Mr. Thal so very much for being here this evening, and Sue Dickinson as well, and all of you from the public who will be listening in and hopefully learning as I will. One of the things that we know with any of these developments, and especially with the upcoming consent judgments, does have a lot to do with the water sewer situation, which all of us, I think, will agree is extremely serious. And so I think it's critical that the Planning Commission be thoroughly versed in the details, and especially the effects of the consent judgment properties that we'll have on that system. Some of the specific questions that I would ask you, Mr. Thal, and I'll just put these out there, and then you can answer them however you feel comfortable. Basically, if you could just give all of us a quick overview of just what are consent judgments. How long are they in effect? Do they have an expiration date? How can they be amended or modified when they fall outside of the court judgment? An example would be to allow for additional requirements by a developer, such as additional water and sewer REUs for a specific project. And then how would the Planning Commission and the township proceed if a developer wants to upgrade their water allotments to a more dense housing? So those are some of the legal questions that I have. And then if you can just answer those, perhaps we can go to the next part of the list, which really kind of focuses specifically on water and sewer issues. So Mr. Thal, I'll turn it over to you. And again, thank you for being here.
Well, you're welcome. These judgments came in a number of years ago. It looks like back in, mainly back in 2010, 2011, with NDC of Sylvan, Magellan Properties, and Manchester Mortgage, and then also Sylvan Limited Holdings. So one thing, which development agreements are still undeveloped? And maybe Carol can help me with that. It looks to me like Sylvan Land Holdings, that consent judgment may be the only one that remains undeveloped. Is that correct, Carol?
Yes, that's the 30 acres that is
Right.
adjacent to Sylvan Crossing.
So, with that consent agreement, that's a 2011 consent agreement. And what happened back then, I mean, I can't tell you exactly what happened, but what normally happens with a consent agreement is the developer wants to do something, and there's a disagreement over their ability to develop their parcels. So they file suit, believing that they have certain rights to develop. And then the township entered into these development agreements at that time, giving them certain rights and privileges to how they can develop their property. Whether it be right-of-way issues, to build private roads within these developments, or to have a certain number of water taps or certain number of sewer taps. Those things are all spelled out in these agreements. And so the agreement then is finalized by a court judgment. So that means that all the parties agreed to it, and then the judge signs off on their consent agreement. So you can't really, if you're going to do anything with it, then you would have to have the parties, the relevant parties, or successors in interest available to make a change to the document. And there'd have to be some agreement to that, and then a judge would have to sign off on it. Otherwise, the terms are what the terms are. So under these agreements, there's provision for how much water capacity, say for instance, water capacity for the Sylvan Limited Holdings property, which is that parcel A, which I think it's known as. So that parcel under the agreement has you committed to provide water service to 73 single-family homes. So that is the capacity that you agreed to back in 2011, and they agreed to a certain cost for that capacity. And the property has been special assessed, and it's still paying on a special assessment for those 73 connections or capacity for 73 REUs, residential equivalent units. So each dwelling is one REU, and they have the capacity to build 73 dwellings on there for water service. Now, if they were to want to go beyond those 73 units or 73 REUs, then I think that has to be discussed as to what the costs would be for them to increase the capacity. And I think then that additional amount could be agreed to be paid by the developer. But I think the township's only committed to those REUs. So, whatever it would take for us to bring that number, hopefully that capacity is there, and I think it is there, but hopefully it's there. If not, the township would be required to bring up its system to their property so it's able to bring in the 73 REUs, for example. And then we cannot assess them for additional costs associated with those REUs for 10 years. So that expires basically, I think September of this year, that part of the agreement. So that means that if it were more costly to service those REUs then, or to provide those, there could be additional assessments associated with that. That's how I understand the contract. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, Robert, this is Mike. A question for you. Can one developer sell his REUs to another developer, or are they locked in with that property?
They are, well, you couldn't just sell it to another developer, no. And, I've heard things about, they might want to try to sell these, sell the capacity from this parcel to a different parcel since they're paying for it. Now, they're not done paying for the special assessment either. So they've acquired a certain number of REUs, not the whole amount, but the agreement provides that they can transfer capacity. It says, in the event that SLH does not utilize all the utility capacity reserved for herein to serve the property, SLH may utilize that capacity to serve other lands that they own or have an interest in, or may in the future acquire, own, or have an interest in, located in the township. So to the extent that they couldn't just transfer those to another developer, they would actually have to have a interest in the other parcel for development purposes. And in any case, if we were to do any transfers, I would expect that there would have to be a written agreement so that binding the parties, so they can't ever come back and say that this parcel has already paid for a certain capacity. Because what might happen is if they transfer capacity, it might be much more expensive than down the road to bring capacity to, parcel A.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Rob, will you repeat that, please? Typing as you were speaking.
So what part of that? So they can transfer under the contract. It does allow the owner of Sylvan Limited Holdings. So whoever owns parcel A, if they are not utilizing the capacity, they are allowed to sell the unutilized capacity or not really sell, but transfer to another parcel that they own in the township. So they couldn't just sell it to another developer and profit off of that. Oh, I'm just going to sell you the capacity as a commodity. They can't do that. They have to be owner and interest, and it would be a transfer to the other property for use at their property.
So when you say owner, what does that mean?
They would have to have an ownership. They would either have to own it or have some type of investment interest in the development of the property, is my opinion.
Any percentages like along those lines?
It doesn't specify that, but I think it would have to be a substantial interest, not just something to try to circumvent the requirements of the contract.
All right.
So this is Carol. My question on that would be, when you say they can transfer the capacity they are not utilizing, if it's totally undeveloped land, and they have an interest in another investment interest in another parcel, can they transfer the entire amount that's not utilized? That's where in reading that, I was a little confused, because there's a substantial number of taps on parcel A, and it's the land itself is low, and so it doesn't make it really desirable for development, yet it has more taps than any of the other consent judgments had. So I was wondering, by not utilizing capacity, what does that exactly mean? Do they have to start developing it, or could they transfer all of it?
We'll see, like you said, that maybe parcel A, for whatever reason, doesn't have the ability to be developed to that sufficient capacity. So, it would be part of it'd be unfair to burden a developer with, I've paid for all these taps, and I can't even develop that property to that extent. So I think it is intended to allow them to transfer that, but the language is a little, the language isn't perfect there. It could be construed in a different manner that would require them to have developed, to the extent they're going to develop parcel A, and then whatever was not utilized could be transferred.
So just because they have those taps doesn't mean that the township is obligated to allow that dense a development just because they have that number of taps either, correct?
Well, no, I do think that, no, I think density of development, it would say that parcel A could be developed to that density of development. I think that's part of the consent agreement.
Okay, even though the land is low, and even though it may not have the ability to support that just by the topography of the land.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, on the developer as to what they thought they could do at that time. And the township, I mean, I can't speak to why maybe they put so many taps on that parcel if they couldn't provide, if they didn't think they could develop it to that level. So, I don't know why they would have done that. So maybe the developer thinks they can put in that many units in that area. I don't know. Or use that many REUs for whatever they develop in there.
All right.
Because they can in that zone. So on that property, the permitted land uses on parcel A, it allows for development, construction, operation of the property as multifamily, industrial, general commercial, and or local commercial. So, I mean, they have that many REUs for those uses. So it could be an industrial building that maybe that is going to require a lot of REUs. Whatever it is, that capacity is for that development. It's not just reserved for residential development of that property. It's by this agreement, the developer has a choice of how they want to develop it.
Okay.
Are there other questions for Mr. Thal?
Don, you got more questions?
Overwhelm you here. So I don't know if these are in any particular order, but, and you can kind of guide me as to whether you want to do them one by one or just hear them
Let's
all.
just go one by one. How about that?
So talking about REUs, how many can be added to, these may not be questions that you can answer for us, but we'll try. How many REUs can be added to the Bristol Road Pump Station in total before upgrading will be required? One of the things about upgrading is a question would be, who's responsible for that? You mentioned here that if we have committed to a certain number, we have to provide that service to them. To what extent? I mean, one of the biggest concerns, I think, is that we're going to overcommit to what that particular pump station can handle.
Well, I think, but that's part of this, part of this agreement they made. And, it's 10 years ago, but it's still, and they may be trying to do something sooner rather than later because we can't, it's locked in for essentially 10 years to provide them that service. We can't assess them an additional cost to provide those REUs to that property for those 10 years. So, I don't know what capacity that your Bristol Road station has. Maybe, I think that might be part of what is coming through in that study. Carol, is that going to be what's addressed in the study?
I don't know. I was not included in the conversation developing any of the specs on that for the study.
Rob, I can answer that for you. The answer is yes.
Okay. So we should know more. I mean, we're studying that issue of what that station can handle. But if it needs an upgrade to provide them 73 single family REUs, then that's going to be, arguably would be the township's expense through the end of, September, I think I said 2011.
Robert, another
21.
question for you. So the Chelsea Square project, they're adding capacity right above and beyond the consent judgment. I think the question is if that tips us over what we've already agreed to in the consent adjustments, who's responsible at that point for any upgrades that may be required?
In my opinion, then at that point, it's on the developer to do. Now, where is the Chelsea Square? Which parcel is Chelsea Square on? A, B?
B and C.
B and C? Okay, so those are part of the Magellan consent agreement?
Yes.
Right, he has a certain amount of capacity that's committed under that contract. If he's exceeding that capacity, then the developer should be responsible then. So some of it is a little, I don't want to worry too much about it. If we're having a study done, I'd wait and see what that study says, because maybe there's sufficient capacity and, we're dealing with a hypothetical that doesn't exist. But if it did, they get the amount of capacity they have contracted for in the consent agreement, and anything beyond that, they should be responsible for, or they can't develop it further. I mean, it's their choice. They could either develop it to the degree that it was agreed to, with the amount of REUs that were agreed, or if it needs to be upgraded, they could pay for those upgraded costs. Now, if there's a public benefit to it, the township can share in those costs, but we can't really pay if it's just for a private development themselves. But if there's an upgrade to the system in general that provides a public benefit to the system in general, then the township can also pick up a portion of that cost if it chose to, but it wouldn't have to.
I think one of the other concerns that we've heard at various junctures is that at various intervals when we have the high rain events, the system, particularly within the trailer park, gets overloaded from rain runoff, and it's caused, I think, problems further on down in the Grass Lake area with capacity. What
That's-
sort of recourse does the township have, with the trailer park in regards to, addressing that issue?
Yeah, they're gonna need to address that. I mean, if we're talking water infiltration into the system, obviously your water, your stormwater system is not tied into your, your water sewer system. I would assume, because it's a newer system. So water infiltration is obviously a big issue, and it's a big no-no to allow into your system. So what you'd have to do is address the water infiltration system with the mobile home park. And essentially they're gonna have to, and it may be, well, they're gonna have to inspect their lines and determine where water infiltration is occurring and correct that. And I think the township should probably get on them about doing that. Or you could surcharge them and I'm not familiar with your water ordinance per se, but I do a lot of sewer and water work for other municipalities. And generally there's a provision in there that allows you to surcharge the development or the property owner if they are doing things that are causing extra costs to the system. Because obviously if there's water infiltration, it's then costing more to process process the flow. And they should be paying for that if it's there, and especially if it's overrunning the system, its capacity levels, then definitely, we should approach them and get that situation rectified as soon as possible.
Well, hopefully the study will give us some more information about it, but
yeah, a lot of times you gotta, you can video the lines and see where water infiltration is coming from too. But
Okay, this is Carol, and I know and Sue's on this on as well. And my understanding, somebody should correct me if I'm wrong. When Sylvan Crossing wanted to expand to their next phase, that was last year, they wanted to expand into their next phase. Before they could do that, they had to correct the infiltration. It was my understanding that they had corrected it, which allowed them to go into the next phase. I don't know if Sue reviewed that, and that's one of my questions as well, is when we have these consent judgment properties that are already being developed, such as Westchester or Sylvan Crossing, when they want to do the next phase, I know the Planning Commission has nothing to say about it, but where does the township stand with asking our consulting engineer, MCI, to review that, and if she needs any other supporting, any other supporting data or any information? Can we ask before they do that to have that reviewed? And Sue, can you lend any information on that as well?
Sure. I was aware that there was some repair done to a sewer pipe, and we were on site to verify the construction and that type of thing. So yes, in the mobile home park, there were some improvements done, or repairs done of their sewer system. Yeah, there were some pipes that water was flowing right into them. Yeah, the stormwater.
So then that goes to me on the question is, where does the authorization lie to ensure that the next phase is going to meet whatever standards there are? So since the mobile home park in Westchester was laid out with X number of units for each one, then when that next phase comes in, they say, we want to start phase 2. Where does the authority to allow them to move forward with that and requirements of any review and documentation of that. So let's say 20 years from now, we're looking up the documents and it's like, well, who allowed them to do that? So there's my question.
Well, the documents control that process, and to some degree, and each of these consent agreements is a little different. And so you have to look at each individual consent agreement and look and see what the standards are in there. But some remove our ability to do much of anything other than rubber stamp, what they're doing, as long as they're within the terms of the agreement. So you can always verify whether or not they're within the terms of the agreement, but if it gives them the right to do that, and a lot of them, I know some of the contracts at least were very, very limiting on what we could do as a township. We just would have to look at that agreement and see when they want to do something new, what we may have control over. Typically it's not, maybe it's, site plan is very limited, and, we're controlled as to how long it takes to issue building permits and other things of that sort. But I think we can always verify that they're in compliance with their consent agreement, but they're very limiting on what we can do.
Even for engineering review, I feel that some of the plans, the consent judgments do not take into account any kind of engineering consulting. Maybe, planning, it's already laid out, planning commission doesn't have anything to say. But when it comes to like the system with the infiltration with the mobile home park, and they're moving on to the next phase, I guess that was my concern of, like, did we ask, where are we allowed to insert our authority in saying, okay, before you start, we want to have engineering look at this?
Yeah, I'm just looking at at this contract. Let's see. We may be able to rely on our sewer or water ordinance itself, because I don't think it's going to override the sewer and water ordinance itself in terms of the provision of the service itself. I mean, we are always going to have the ability to ensure that it's properly operating, and if it's hooked up to our system, that it's functioning properly. I think those are always going to be standards that we can go in under our sewer or water ordinance and verify. But sometimes how the costs are spread on that, you end up maybe paying some of the cost, maybe they pay some of the cost, and negotiate that out.
Okay.
But I do think it should be a discussion topic always.
With I guess, between who?
With the developer and the township, if they are coming in on a new phase.
Okay, and who in the township, I guess? So we always have, that's kind of a nebulous area. It's like, okay, who are they going to be talking to, and, to give permission on something, without, to make sure that, I always worry about, I just want to document the heck out of everything.
Well, they would have to be dealing with the water authority, or the sewer authority, or the township on the water system. They would have to be dealing with whoever is in charge of those systems, requesting further services from them. And then I think they can request assurances of how it's hooked up and that it's appropriately hooked up, and what it's, that it's operating properly. I think we can do all those things under our sewer or water authority, but the sewer is controlled by a sewer authority, and the water, I assume, is controlled by the township. And then, it should be coordinated through your building building department, which is your building authority. And it could, from the standpoint of zoning compliance, there's not a whole lot there, but I think you would still have to come to the township to make sure that they're in compliance with their consent agreement. So there's a number of
Through the
different
board.
that should be involved.
Okay, is that like a board decision?
Not, it's probably not going to rise to the board unless there's a problem, because it should
Okay.
go to these other bodies. If there's a bigger issue, it could. If there's an issue with the consent agreement itself, then yeah, that would be a board issue. But in terms of just, okay, I'm a developer and I'm expanding out under the consent agreement. I mean, that's building authority, that's sewer authority, water department, and, zoning compliance to make sure that they're in compliance with the consent agreement. But the building department's also got to be aware of the consent agreement and the requirements there.
I kind of wonder sometimes if they're not, that's another issue of communication.
Yeah, you have to, that's one, you have to make sure you develop a good process of checks and balances and communication between all these different entities. Somebody, there has to be a good open communication. So nobody is, maybe getting ahead of anybody else on it. And so that they know what all the issues are. Part of it is when you don't have, if you have a sewer authority, how much are you involved in that at all at the township level? Your sewer authority is really in charge of that. So some of that, or building authority, when they get to building, if you've got a building authority, there's very little of the township that administration that has to be involved in that. It's through your building authority.
Robert, this is Mike. I have another question for you. Leone Township, where all the waste goes, is having their own problems. And I know they're out of compliance with the state for what they're dumping into the Grand River at this time. If we were to allow a development to come in that goes over what we've agreed to them, I guess I don't know what the type of agreements are, but say we add 44 more REUs and Leone gets into a problem. Do we somehow become liable for some of their issues down the line?
It depends what our contract says. We would have there should be a contract that discusses capacity and how much capacity they allow us to have. So there would be an agreement that would say, how much flow we're allowed into their. We probably would have purchased amount of capacity at some point in time.
So from a planning commission perspective, then we would need to understand that contract and whether or not the projected flows would tip us over that proverbial wall.
Right. You have a lot of, right. So somebody would need to look at that, but that should be the Sewer and Water Authority, who represents the township, should be able to tell the planning commission what is, the capacity and that we're within capacity. There's just a lot of different entities involved within your township for development purposes.
So this is Carol, and because we're so small staff-wise, and Bob Skull, I'm sorry that he's not available tonight, but he would be that contact liaison person between the sewer authority and the township. Is that about sums it up?
Well, what would you say what is his official position with the township?
He's the DPW director.
So, yeah, he should liaison between the township and the Sewer and Water Authority. Who sits on, so you have board member, you have at least one board member on the Sewer and Water Authority, who can carry information back and forth. But yeah, Bob Skull would be the party to communicate with whoever the director of the Sewer and Water Authority is. I assume you have a executive director of the Sewer Water Authority. Is that correct?
We have board members.
I'm not that familiar with it.
We have,
Rod is.
we have board members. I'm a board member and Pam Burns is a board member. And then we have 2 other public on the board also.
So, but
But is
who
there an executive director?
operates the system?
I'm sorry, Rob?
But you must have a employee who operates the system, a director or somebody of that sort. Right.
That is Multi-Lakes that actually operates the system, keeps all the repairs going and the lift stations repaired and all that.
So they operate and maintain the system, but who kind of oversees what they do, or is there an office person involved in that?
Bob Skull and I will be.
Okay. So Bob is also then involved in the sewer authority too?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, Bob's going to be your source of information then on those issues of capacity or flow, how much flow you have and whether this is exceeding the flow. They've committed to take a certain amount of flow from the township under these agreements, I would assume. So, whether they're even close to those levels, who knows? Typically, you negotiate pretty big flow amounts because you want to, you don't want to inhibit your ability to grow as a municipality.
Rod, this is Mike. I have a question for you real quick. I think a lot of that we turn over to Grass Lake in the near future. Is that correct? From the ownership perspective and management?
That's still in a debate issue, Mike.
Okay.
Grass Lake doesn't want it. And I think that's coming up in it's either 22 or 24 that should happen. And they voiced their opinion that they don't want to take it over. So I don't know where it's going to end up at yet.
Okay. But I think initially that was the plan, correct?
Yes.
And they are contractually obligated at this point, even though they don't want to?
Yes.
Okay. So Rob, I guess down the road we'll have another township. Well, I mean, they're already involved since it runs through their vicinity. Are they part of the sewer board too, Rod?
They are supposed to be, but they have never shown up.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just gets into the overall management, because if you get development going on at their end, how do you regulate and understand what's really going into it? But
And that's been a problem.
okay.
Yeah, typically you have an agreement though of how much flow we can put through that line. If it's going through one township to another township for treatment, there should be a flow through agreement as to how much flow we get. So even if they are putting flow into it also, we still have a contracted amount of flow, unless it's some kind of shared flow between the 2 municipalities.
Robert, do you know how they measure that flow?
They would have, there's meters that they put in the system at certain points that measure it.
Okay.
It goes in certain, they'll have a manhole where they should be measuring the flow from. Where it exits the township, they may be measuring it, and where it exits, Grass Lake Township.
Okay.
They may measure it. So then they know what we're putting in the line, what they're putting in the line. That's where I can't tell you that's how it's set up, but that's how it could be set up.
Okay.
I just don't know enough about those. I mean, we'd have to get, and the township should have a good handle on all that information.
Yeah, but I think as Rod pointed out, I mean, Grass Lake doesn't even show up to the board meetings, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's an issue. I mean, it sometimes you just have a line that's going to flow through another municipality. At some point that could become, Sylvan's line. And just, they then have an agreement to flow in through our line. But you know, taking over utility infrastructure is not always a great thing because there's costs associated with that. If you do, you want cash to come in, you know, that other parties have collected for repair and maintenance. Because in your rates, you should have a repair and maintenance long-term charge in there to build up a fund for when you have to maintain those. So if you were to say you were to take over that line, you would want to make sure that it comes with money that was collected to take care of that line. But if somebody's disinterested in it, maybe they shouldn't be involved in it.
Dawn, you had a question?
Yes, please. You keep talking about, I mean, you have mentioned that we are by contract allowed to put so much sewage through those pipes. What happens in backing up to the development? What happens if we overextend the use of that and we're putting forth more than we should? How?
You might have to purchase more capacity. I mean, if capacity exists and the treatment facility wants to provide the capacity. So
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I mean, I'd have to really look at all those contracts to be able to tell you for sure what you have, what your rights are in that regard. I've never looked at them in that manner as to what your flow through rights are, but we probably should, so that we can tell you, you know, what is our right, and what is our right to purchase additional capacity if we want to purchase additional capacity. Sometimes they'll just say, no, you know, we're not going to sell you anymore because we want the capacity for our, you know, our development. So, you know, I just don't know what the capacity of their treatment plant is. And then I don't know, you know, I can't speak to how much they've given us of that. But normally you buy it when we would have bought into that capacity at some point.
But there's definitely issues going on right now, so.
Mm-hmm. So it's really important then to take a look at, though, it's very important to take a look at how your utility infrastructure is working.
It seems that it's something of a mystery, and that we absolutely need to get the numbers for, because I think it causes a lot of people concern because we actually don't know anything. So we're creating, as you mentioned earlier, we're creating concern and worry over something that we may not have to be worrying about. So we need to absolutely get those numbers.
Right. You might have plenty of, it might be not an issue. It could be not an issue for the next 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
I can't speak to that, but you should know. But it's not surprising that you wouldn't necessarily, because you have an authority that supposedly represents your interests in the sewer system. And so a lot of times the township then is not as interested in that. They just assume the authority, it will provide the service to their, you know, whoever needs it in their municipality. And it's really the authority who should be paying attention to capacity issues and development issues. Every time there's a development, it's really the authority who is saying, yes, there's capacity there for that, and how that system should be developed.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it sounds like to me then we have a lot to learn on this survey or whatever, and until we hear back from them, we really don't know.
And maybe Sue can tell us whether is a survey on both sewer and water, or just water.
The study that's being done is my understanding, it's just for that Bristol pump station, because the Chelsea Square project has a lot more REUs than what was planned for. So that's my understanding.
That's correct.
That's kind of what I thought. So, I mean, some of the issues regarding sewer are things that, you know, maybe Bob Skull might know, or Bob Skull should know, and can find out. through his management position with the authority. And then he could report that to the planning commission. He can report that to the township board, if they foresee any issues. But there may or may not be, we might be worrying about something that's not an issue.
Mhm. Other questions out there?
Steve, I have another one. So we have a development now then that wants to use more capacity than their consent agreement has allowed. And that's on hold. And hopefully we will come to some agreement so that their project can be approved, but maybe not to the extent that the site plan originally showed. What I think I'm hearing is that we really, before we do very much more approving of developments on the system, we need that water suit, we need that report.
Well,
Especially about the Bristol Road station. So am I on the right track here?
No, I definitely think you are. I mean, because the township operates its water system. And so, from that standpoint, you definitely need to have that information. And, in terms of the sewer system, again, the authority should be telling you as the planning commission if there's any issue with the development from them. You can say, okay, authority, we want you to verify that there's no issues with capacity. And they should be able to do that for you. The water system is the township, so it makes sense that we're doing a study to see what the capacity of that pump station is, whether it can support this project, and maybe how many more REUs can it support?
Thank you.
Robert, the person doing the study, say they make a mistake, would they be liable if the township had to come back in later and redo work that may or may not be done?
Well, potentially, yeah. I mean, if it's I would think potentially they would be liable through their professional liability insurance or whatever it may be. If they're telling us that there's a certain amount of capacity, I would hope that they're being accurate in what they're telling us.
Okay.
And if there is an error factor, we should be knowing what that error factor is.
So it sounds to me like we're gonna be relying then on Multi Lakes to give us feedback on the sewage capacity on this project?
I think
No.
it's the sewer authority actually needs to answer it. And what,
So the sewer authority may go to their operator and to ask them questions, about it, but it really should be, probably Bob Skull talking with, your sewer operator and maintenance company, and then knowing what the contracts provide for flow. But it's probably going to be more from Bob Skull reporting to the planning commission. And he should then communicate with the sewer operator and manager.
Sue Dickinson.
Thank you. I guess I have a question, because at the beginning you thought there was only one consent judgment that had not been developed yet. And I mean, there's some that are being reviewed right now, but take for example Westchester. The first 2 phases are done, but there are many more phases to come.
So probably what we should be doing ultimately is looking at how many RUs have we committed in these agreements. I would have hoped that when they did these agreements, they knew what their system capacity was. But, we should be looking at then the potential build out of all those properties if they're on the same system. If they're on the same water system, as to what that capacity is in that area. Maybe not just one property or another, but if it's all built out, if we give everybody the right they have under the agreements, can our system handle that? And if not, though, that may be a cost that the township's got to bear.
I tend to agree with your position on that, Mr. Thal.
Yeah, I mean, I hope these consent agreements are good, are a good agreement, for us, but I can't tell you.
Okay, this is Carol. So I want to make sure I understood what Sue was saying, and that the next phases of, I'm sorry, can you just kind of sum that up again? Because I know that there's been some concern about, like for Westchester going into the next phases, and that I believe that, Sue, again, correct me if I'm wrong. So my understanding is there wasn't enough water capacity for suppression on the next phases, that they would need a booster station or booster pump there. So that's only on 3. So going up to, 9 and 10, which are, again, those 9 and 10 haven't been identified. Those are pretty much open, but the other 300 and some homes are up to phase 8.
Yeah, we have to look at the agreements, because some of these, and Sue, you can address that, but some of these agreements, like this one expires at least in the at the end of September 2011, in terms of being locked into not being able to charge additional fees. So I'm thinking that maybe the contracts are set up like, okay, we're kind of locking in the rates for the first 10 years, but if it's more after that, then we're going to be able to assess those higher costs.
For providing the water, or
Right.
for providing whatever utilities for the additional phases?
Yeah, because like in this agreement, I don't have that agreement in front of me, but, so each agreement's a little bit different, and we'd have to analyze each agreement. But, so like in this one, with the exception of future charges assessed to all users of the water system for maintenance and replacement, in the event that SLH connects to the water system, the property shall not be additionally assessed to pay for water service improvements or township obligations in connection therewith for a period of 10 years from the date of entry. So if there's additional costs after that 10 years, arguably, I think it's saying that we can assess those. And I don't know what Westchester Farms agreement says. That's why we'd have to look at it specifically.
That would give a lot of assurance if we could find out for sure how that would end up having to be paid for.
Now, do you know, under their consent agreement with Westchester, did it verify a certain number of REUs to be supplied to the property?
I don't know exactly.
Boy, I haven't looked at that one for a long time. I do believe there were a number of them, but I honestly can't recall. It's been a long time since I've looked at that consent
Right.
judgment.
So they could have the right to develop it further, but they may only have a certain capacity that they've purchased, okay? So,
Right.
so they may be on the dime, it may be their dime then to develop it further, even though they have the right to develop it, under their agreement. They can develop more phases, but they may have only bought a certain amount of capacity at that time. And so additional capacity, as they use it for additional phases, may be on their dime. So we really need to look at that contract and see what we could go back on. I would hate to think that we have to pay for them to basically expand their development.
But even if they're not expanding, just to get to start construction for phase 3, is that there's been discussion about the actual capacity of the water to serve for phase 3, just getting to phase 3. You know, that the pressure wasn't quite
Right.
where it should be.
Right, which, yeah, I mean, there's gonna be issues as you go further in.
So it's not on the township for that. It's their obligation to put whatever booster they need to have to get the water pressure for the next phases.
It's gonna be whatever that contract says, whatever
Okay.
that consent agreement says, but
It doesn't really address that, unfortunately.
well, then
That
what?
you'll have to read that one.
Yeah, because then what you're actually looking at is you're looking at how many REUs did they purchase within the consent agreement. They may be able to develop it more to a higher density, but how many REUs did they purchase? And is there a sunset date in there as to, after that date, then we can start charging them more for provision of that service? Because if they've only bought a certain number of REUs up front, then it's going to be whatever it costs to bring the system out for the rest of the project. Because you really can't take other people's rate paying. I can't take somebody else's rate that they've paid and use it to expand to provide service for Westchester Farms. You can't do that. People's rates
So
have
this,
for the general system, but it's not intended to extend lines to other people.
so this is where I was thinking that because the planning commission has no say in it, but when they come in and they want zoning permits for the next phases, it's like, okay, we're starting phase 3, and we'd like permission to start phase 3. That's where I really rely on Sue to take a look at that, or review that with Bob Skull and make some determinations, and also the fire department as well. So I guess that's where I'm wondering is what limitations or how much authority does the township have to say you can't start phase 3 until your water pressure is?
Oh, I think we would have that authority to, we have the authority to ensure that they're properly hooked up, that the service is being properly provided within their, within their development. So I definitely think we have the authority to say, hey, before you start, you're not going to pull any building permits until we're assured that the system's going to function properly.
Okay.
Now, who's going to pay for that engineering? That can be that may be a trickier issue.
I have a question from Elizabeth's iPad.
Yeah, this is Tom, Elizabeth, Dawn's husband. And are we in public comment now?
Go ahead. We'd like to hear what you have to say.
All right, well, I've listened to this since the start, and it seems pretty clear that Sylvan Township hasn't a clue as to how many REUs they're committed to under consent judgment, how many REUs they may be committed to for more recent developments not under consent judgment. You approved a development agreement last night. That must have included some number of REUs. I don't know whether they were under consent judgment or if it was a new development. But right now, I don't have a lot of confidence that the Sylvan Township understands what it can do with terms of capacity, not just at the Bristol Road Station, but every station downstream from that to get to Leone Township. And I'm glad to hear there's a study going on, but I hope Carol can hold everybody up until we get that study and get those. said it, we gotta have the numbers, and maybe there's nothing to, but I'm not confident that there isn't some great deal to worry. And the taxpayers of Sylvan Township are end up paying for sewer and water commitments that they had no part in deciding on. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a lot riding on this survey and getting the numbers back. I agree.
The last development was part of a consent agreement, though. The Chelsea Springs 2.
No, Chelsea Springs 2 was part of the original PUD. It was a multi-phase PUD, and it was not a consent judgment property at all.
Say that again, please.
I said Chelsea Springs 2 was not consent judgment property. It was part of the original Sylvan Heights original PUD, which was a multi-phase PUD. It was not a consent judgment property. Chelsea Springs that was approved last night.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, Dawn, numbers this afternoon. And it's me, the Bristol Road Station was permitted by the state for 190 REUs. And we added everything. And I think if, you know, we could be wrong, we may not have the right data. But I think you've committed right up to 190 REUs. You got 9 extra REUs to play with. I'll bet nobody understands that. And maybe we don't understand it right either, because I don't know if we're working with the right data. But it doesn't look good.
Rod, this is Mike. I have a quick question for you. So I think as Linden Township is on the sewer authority too, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And when they have they had any new development go onto the sewer system over there?
They are topped out. There'll be no more development from Linden Township on the sewer system.
Okay. That's good in a way. It takes one complication out of the picture, right?
Rod, I had somebody wants to speak and is it Mike?
Yeah, Mike Jarosik here, former Sewer Authority board member. Tom, to address your question, if you look at the numbers for Bristol Drive Station, yes, it was permitted for 199 REUs. When you look at the consent judgment and what I believe to be the original phase development of Chelsea Springs or whatever it was called originally, you total those up, it comes to 224 REUs. When you talk to the engineer though, what you find is in a phased development like this, typically the planning is for 3.5 people, and Sue Dickinson can confirm this, I hope. It's for 3.5 people per unit at 100 gallons a person. So that looks at 350 gallons a day per unit. In actuality, these are apartments. There's 1 or 2 people in them. They use much less water in it. So the engineer is going to review this. And when he says there's capacity available, he's looking at the current capacity use and making sure that everything complies with the state requirements. And it's just adjusted for the current capacity use, which is much less than what the original design was.
So say that in simple terms, Mike, please.
Yes, there's going to be capacity at Bristol Drive Station. The real concern I have had is downstream.
How much can Sylvan Township add to that station? Do we know?
The engineering study will determine that. Rod can address that.
Okay, does the engineering study then, all that stuff that goes to Bristol has to go downstream? Can downstream handle it? Mike?
That I don't know. I've been out of the loop for a while. And a lot of that depends on the infiltration coming from the manufactured housing development.
So the point is, we don't know if downstream can handle it. And if we authorize a bunch of stuff for Bristol and we find out it can't be handled downstream, is Sylvan Township liable?
The main problem Sylvan Township, I believe, will have for handling that flow is controlling the infiltration at Sylvan Crossing, because that whole area was built on a farmland that absorbed water from runoff and the wetlands that are there. So
So it goes back to Sandy's point. We don't really have all the numbers that are needed to make further development, to permit further developments. I think the township should consider a moratorium and hookups to this sewer system until we really know what we're doing.
I think we're good. And, the engineer can review. Back in 2018, when I was still on the board, we did completed a SAW grant, a storm and wastewater grant. And Appendix B of that study was a complete hydraulic study of the sewer system with the capacity issues addressed in the conclusions. So that would be the 2018 report. The engineer reviews should hopefully build on that.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Rod, do we have any idea when the study is going to be completed?
Yeah, it'll be very, very shortly. I would assume next week.
Okay, so it's coming pretty soon then. Good. Sounds
Yes.
like info we really need.
Yes.
But you're also, you're kind of trapped by these consent agreements too. I mean, you have to comply with them. They were entered into, court ordered, and you got to do them. So, if there's costs associated with it, you've committed to those REUs. Now, going over those, that's why we have to have this study to determine, if they're trying to build over what their REU capacity is in the consent agreement.
Then we have the right to tell them no if they want to go over the REUs.
Exactly. But if it was designed, if you said at 350 gallons, that's a high number, right? The number is going to be a lesser amount of actual flow. Normally it's like 250 or 280.
So we've erred to the high side at least on
Which
the
is
engineering.
good.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So when it was constructed, they did it the right way. Put it that way.
Other questions? Tom, we haven't heard anything from you tonight.
Oh, it sounds like we can't do a whole lot or talk about a lot until we find out the numbers.
I agree.
Is what it sounded to me.
Yep.
So this is Carol, and I have a question in another area. So this consent judgment is allowing different uses, and the Chelsea Square project is now proposed for 81 apartments. So there was some discussion in the preliminary hearing that at some point the developer may wish this. Now this came from the architect. That at some point in time the developer may wish to change these units as privately owned. And I don't know if how does that work? I was actually kind of blown away by that statement, because they're apartments, which means they're rental units. And then if he, at some point in time, wanted to sell one building and wanted to make it as a basically condos, turn it into condos.
Right, that's what they.
Is
would
that
do.
a permissible, I mean, how does the planning commission approve something when that is the future intent? Or what is the township's ability to restrict something like that or to allow it, either way?
Yeah, I think they'd have to come back to the township. You'd have to look at the condominium act, but I think they'd have to come back to the township and revise their site plan. To do that. But they could, I mean, at some point, change it over to condominiums. But it would be very strange to do that with an apartment complex or, with rental. It'd be better. I mean, if they were going to do that, I would think they'd do that now.
Yeah, I was really kind of taken aback by that comment. And the other thing I was concerned about is because this is a new development on vacant land that did not have a PUD. And it's not going to be a PUD. The apartments are not going to be a PUD. So the project to the north was an original multi-phased planned unit development for condominiums. The developer is now taking a look at having these apartments, but wants to have the same privileges of the condominiums by only having sidewalks on one side of the road, not having street lighting. So where does the planning commissions, where is their ability to say, you know what, the Chelsea Springs, Hillcrest, and Springs 2 project are completely separate. This is a new project, and the enforcement, I guess, or requirement of the land development standards. How firm can they stand on some of these, knowing that the development to the north was allowed to having a privilege of a little bit more exercise and leniency?
Well, it's just whether, if they had the right under the original PUD to develop a certain way, it doesn't mean that on a new property, somebody has that same right. I mean, their rights are going to be controlled by their consent agreement and what that allows for.
And that it actually says it needs to comply, but I know the argument is coming and I've heard it already. And so I'm just like, I want to get it out there with the planning commission as well. Is like, I know how it's easy to be, when you have a development that they're back to back and you want to be, give some leniency, yet at the same time, when you have that kind of density, it really requires a little bit to be held more to the standards.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess the planning commission just holds to its standards. Ultimately, you approve the development, approve it how it's supposed to be approved, not how the developer, wants it to be approved if that's not allowed for under the ordinance.
Okay, as we get into the preliminary, that will be where the planning commission, will have to make their comments, because the preliminary will be, as he moves on to the final, I would hate to see him say, well, you didn't tell me that in the preliminary. So hopefully we'll be able to move that forward.
Well, so when you'll do a report for the preliminary, right? You do a report for that?
I do, and Sue does as well. And we both cited the fact that it didn't have sidewalks on both sides of the road.
So yeah, when the planning commission reviews the project, you review the preliminary report. Just make sure when you do that you you specifically, if that's an issue, then you specifically call that out, that they have to comply with that. I mean, but otherwise they're going to have to comply with what the standards are. It's not, unless it's a waivable standard by the planning commission, they have to comply with it. So, if the plan doesn't show it, then you would be saying that it's gotta show it. They gotta revise the plan.
All right. Sue and I have been consistent on that. So.
Well, no, I think you need to be consistent. That's, inconsistency is why you end up with all these consent agreements.
Mhm.
Right.
So it sounds like we have the right as a planning commission to say we want sidewalks on both sides of the street. Because that has nothing to do with the consent judgment.
Right, and your ordinance requires it.
Right.
If that's what's required by their ordinance, then that's what they have to do. And I think you can put that bluntly and simply to them.
Does it make a difference if it's in the land development standards instead of in an ordinance?
Well, when you say the land development standards, what do you mean by that?
It's a separate document. Carol, you would know better than me whether the ordinance refers to it.
Yeah, so we have a whole document of land development standards that were adopted, but were not codified.
I mean, that's, I'd have to look at that. I don't know.
Okay.
You
Okay,
know,
I can
if
send
the
it to you.
ordinance if the ordinance allows for that, that's one thing, but we have to operate under our ordinances. So, you know, if it's something that we're trying to enforce, we have to have the ability to point to a standard that allowed us to adopt additional standards or something else. Or it's just got to be in the ordinance itself. It can also be, I mean, the planning commission can also put some reasonable conditions on site plans, but you have to be very careful when you do that. You know, if you're going beyond, there should be language that allows you to do things for the public health, safety, and welfare, and you'd have to make determinations in that regard.
Okay.
Hey, do we have any more questions? Sounds like we've covered a lot.
Steve?
Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, Steve, it's been a great planning commission meeting and I thank everybody. But what are the action items that the planning commission needs before they move forward with any further development in this township on the sewer system? I mean, it was a great discussion. A lot was said and people are gonna, we know we need numbers and so on and so forth, but what action items are there for the planning commission? Are we just gonna say goodnight?
For tonight?
We're just gonna say goodnight, or are we gonna
Yeah.
have a list of action items that the planning commission needs before it approves any further development in the sewer district?
I don't know of any action we're going to take tonight, but I think we definitely need to get some numbers on the sewer system before we start approving many more projects that are asking for more sewer units or water units than are given in the consent judgments. I mean, we got to give them those.
No, I understand that. No, I wasn't asking for action tonight. I was asking for what are the things that has to happen moving forward? What does the planning commission need?
Yeah, I think the one thing, Tom, to answer that question is we need to get really what are the REUs that we've allocated? How does it play to our capacity? Are we within our constraints at Leone? You know, how much available headroom do we have, right? And that we probably need to put that request over to the sewer authority to provide that type of information. I think that's where probably the right place to go with it.
Yeah, I agree completely with what you're saying. And it's just a matter for the record, for the minutes, that this stuff has to be done.
Yeah, somebody's got to follow up.
I, as a resident, am not comfortable that we know what the hell we're doing.
Well, and I think all of us don't want to overextend ourselves either. That's why we're having this discussion.
I know that, and I'm grateful.
Other questions and comments?
at this point, do we want to ask if anyone else from the public have comments that they want to make?
Yep, if you do, please raise your hand. I see a Mary.
Yep, that's me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Just one quick question. I can't remember what meeting it was in, but there was a proposal to extend the sewer along Pierce Road. Does any of what we've discussed or what you've discussed tonight have anything to do with that particular section of sewer as well? I mean, I know you were talking about developments, but the proposal, I think it was from Rod, was saying to extend the sewer along Pierce Road, correct? Rod, can you talk to that, please?
Yep, I can. And what happened since that meeting has gone on, I have seen the entire sewer district map and Pierce Road is already in there.
Right. So that discussion had nothing to do with what's happening along Pierce Road then?
I thought it did until I actually got my hands on the sewer district map and saw that Pierce Road is already in the sewer district.
Okay, thank you.
So really, I guess the only thing would have to do with that is our overall capacity with the downstream to Leone. Patrick, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. Just following up to Mary's question, now that we know that Pierce Road is in the sewer district already, is it possible for the Pierce Road residents, or how could the Pierce Road residents get a map of the zoning district, of the sewer district, so they can see exactly which parcels we're talking about? Because that was the question that came up in the board meeting. That's one question, just on behalf of the Pierce Road people. My other comment is I'm going to attempt to sum up some of this discussion that I heard about capacity and the capacity study that's underway. And I think what I'm hearing is that we're committed to provide a certain number of RUs to the consent judgment properties. And therefore, we have to be very careful about the properties outside of the consent judgment area, that we don't commit too many RUs to them. Otherwise, we could be on the hook in total for too much when the consent judgment property starts to develop. We don't want to overcommit where we have options, right?
That is correct.
So this is Carol, and I will say that I will talk with Bob Skull, and if Mike Jurosik is still on, in 2014, I believe it was, somewhere between August and October, I can't recall the exact date, there was a sewer district that was created for the township, and that identified a sewer district area, but there were very few parcels that were put into it other than those like around the lakes. So again, if Mike is on and he wants to address that.
The only district I was aware, the parcels on the lakes that actually had frontage were in the district. Backlot parcels were not included. Some of those requested to be included because the sewer ran by their properties. Rod, I'd like to see the map that says Pierce Road is in the sewer district, because my original maps only show that any of the areas that were part of the special assessment district were in the sewer district. So even though sewer ran up Pierce Road and then it ran along, the water ran along Garvey and over to Kavanaugh Lake, I was not aware ever that any of that was included. Now it could be included, but.
So I think what we have to do is go back to 2014 when the sewer district was created and put those parcels on a map and map that out.
Well, that never went through. In 2014, they were going to expand the sewer district to include everybody along the sewer lines. Apparently, the state of Michigan allows, if you're within 200 feet or whatever of a sewer line, you can be required to connect by a township. That was never followed through because of the public dissatisfaction with that type of event.
Okay, but it seems to me the discussion was that the district was created, but the parcels were not. Like you had,
Nothing.
the analogy was you had the bucket, but no parcels were put in the bucket. So the district was created, but there were very few parcels that were put in it. So I guess we'll have to go back and see what the township actually adopted and then recreate it that way.
Yeah, I don't think they ever put any parcels in the bucket.
Right, but the district, right, but the bucket was there. So the district was created, but the parcels were not put in it.
I'm not even sure it got that far. I know they wanted to create the bucket. I don't know if it went that far.
Yeah, well, we'll have to go back because I know that was 2014.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Mike, Tom Kaplis, can I ask one more question, please, Steve?
Sure.
Mike,
Yes.
I think you said Bristol Road was approved by the state for 199 REUs. And they're actually using 220?
No, when they did the submission to the state, they submitted for 199 REUs. When you count up everything that they wanted to develop at that point, it added up to 224 REUs. So there was a disconnect.
How did they expect to do that if they were only permitted by the state for 199?
Well, they probably, and this is not my area of expertise, so I'm just guessing. Hopefully the engineer, when he comes back with the report, will tell you. But it has to do with the fact that they start with a design standard of 350 gallons per day per REU. 10 years down the
But
road.
who gets to make that decision for the township?
That's the standard. That's the
It
engineering
was
standard.
199. If I understand you right,
Those are different
199 REUs at 350 gallons. We find out we're using some number of gallons less, so they thought they could go up to 200 and some, 20 some REUs. Who makes that decision for Sylvan Township?
So what'll happen is we're getting the new apartment complex in. They'll have to submit another Part 41 permit. So it'll go through an engineering review where they'll look at the capacity, the current capacity and flow at Bristol Drive, and they'll have to be able to justify that the capacity is available at the design standard for these additional units based off of our current flow. It's something to that effect. This is just from what I've heard. I'm not the engineer.
So in order to exceed the state permitted 199,
no, the state it will get readjusted. The 199 is a design number. What they really are going to start looking at is the total flow, the design flow basis for the station. There is also.
Yeah, but that's okay. This is getting too technical. This meeting.
Well, let me,
Thank you,
Mike, I appreciate your statements, Mike. It's helpful. You know, what I did is I just did a quick calculation, and we're going to have an engineer looking at this, but a quick calculation of 199 REUs at 350 gallons per day is 69,650 gallons per day. But if our actual use is around 250 flow gallons per day, that's actually 278 REUs so that it can support. So, and that will be finally determined by, I mean, the state's going to have to approve that, but that's, so to me, and I'm not an engineer, this is just a simple crunching of some numbers. It shows me that there's a lot more capacity there than you know, where we're at, if it goes to 278 REU. So I think we're probably worried about something that we don't have to be worried about, but let the engineer tell us. That's That's
Yeah.
his job.
And it's good to have them review that because if, I don't know if everybody's aware, but this station was built by Magellan Properties. They submitted the Part 41 permit, and then this ownership of the station was turned over to Sylvan Township. So Jones and Henry was not involved at all in this pump station. They only designed everything right up to the station in Sylvan Crossing.
Thank you, Mike.
And one final comment as a person on the sewer system and public comment. There's been a lot of talk about, you know, the sewer authority needs to do this and the sewer authority needs to do that for the REUs. All the time I spent on the sewer authority was trying to figure out what all these commitments were made by the township. All the contracts were written by the township. All the capacity was done by Jones and Henry for the township. All the stations were developed. The authority had no say in any of this. I do have libraries of some of the documents. That's it. You need a township sewer engineer thoroughly involved in this.
Him?
Mike, does this go way back to previous boards, perhaps 15 years ago when things were starting to develop?
This goes back to 2001 and before, and
Yeah.
2004. There's discrepancies where the as designed don't meet the as built. The as built
Yeah.
don't meet what's actually in the ground. Lots
Yeah.
of little details.
And there are only a few people that might remember that. So I appreciate all the knowledge you always bring to this. And I've missed your knowledge over the past few years. So it's good to see you here tonight. Thanks.
And I do want to clarify something. I think there was a misunderstanding, or I didn't hear something right. When I asked to have Pierce Road put in the sewer district, it was so that when those developments came in, if developments came in, they would be required to connect. So it's already been in the district, but like has been said, there are no parcel numbers with them in the district. So no, I did not, when I asked for that, that was my reasoning behind that. Just so they would be forced into connecting.
Without knowing the capacity of the system, that may not have been the smart thing to do, Rod.
Any other questions or comments?
Just this one. These have all been very, very good comments and good participation. It's time to wrap it up. Mr. Thal's had a long day. I'm sure Sue has had a long day. I know Carol and all of the board members have. So I would suggest at this point that perhaps it's time to call for an adjournment. I also think that we should do this more often. This has been extremely beneficial to all of us. So in future planning commission meetings, when we don't have action items to do, I think it would behoove us to take the time to come together and discuss and have these kinds of discussions. So thank you all very much. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Well, we need to cover communications in our little comment section yet, but I think we should close this issue on the new business. It has been a very valuable discussion. And I thank Mr. Throw and Sue for being here. Thank you all for your input.
You're very welcome. Good night.
Good night.
Right, Sue.
Carol, did you have a comment on communication about the city of Chelsea zoning map at all, or is that just to make us aware of it, that it was sent to us?
Well, I sent it to you because I sent it to you because the meeting was happening before this planning commission meeting. So I sent it to you in an email. So if anybody wanted to participate or be part of that process, you would have it in advance. And I'm just was documenting that you had received it.
Okay. Okay, any other comments or discussion from planning commission members before we adjourn?
Steve, this is Micah. Just one, I think if we would be good to send a request over to the sewer authority to get a capacity report, at least the current state as to what they understand.
Yep, I agree. I think we need to find out a lot more information for sure.
So my question is, what are you asking for specifically? I mean, are you looking for something outside of the
I'd just like to see
the
what they,
issue regarding the Chelsea Square project?
yeah, I would just like to understand what they currently understand about the overall system. And then, nothing elaborate, just a kind of a current state. We've got capacity for, say, 500 REUs. We've used 200, and this is what we think we got left. And by the way, this is what we owe Leone, and this is how much is going to Leone, and this is where the headroom's at. So we can kind of get ballparks, and then maybe that'll lead into other conversations on, things for down the road.
Okay, I think maybe that's a conversation I will ask Rob Dahl to participate in the next meeting, so you can direct that directly to him.
Wouldn't it be the sewer authority, right? Oh, Bob Skull. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, Bob Dahl would be the liaison to the sewer authority.
So, okay.
Yep, that sounds like it would work, so we can get some idea on our total capacity, so we don't give something or promise something that we don't have. It sounds like we're safe, but it'd be really good to know we are.
That's all I had.
Okay. Any other comments, or I will move to adjourn the meeting? Need a second?
Second.
Second.
So be it.
Thank you, everybody. I'm
Yep.
sorry, I missed that.
Who was the second?
Please, yes, who was the second?
I
Sandy.
was. Sandy's fine.
Andy's fine. She seconded it.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Good night.